Hey, what's up, guys? Tyler here with Secure Team. I hope you all had a great 4th of July. I went ahead and took a few days off and spent the holiday with my family and set off some awesome illegal fireworks that I had to go across state lines to get. But nonetheless, we had an awesome time and basically created our own little fireworks show right in the neighborhood. Now, we have some very interesting things to talk about today. Now, as you're well aware, for years now, we have documented the pros and cons, the truths from the falsehoods, in terms of whether the moon landing was truly real or an elaborate hoax done by NASA. And as I've stated before, and I will state again, I fully believe that we did go to the moon. Now, the evidence that we did go to the moon far outweighs the evidence that we did not go. And I know many of you out there who may be new to this research and were probably like I was, because when I first began researching into the topic of the moon landing hoax, I saw all of the typical evidence that was used, and I fairly quickly became convinced that, oh my god, the moon landing was really hoaxed. However, as the years progressed and I did a little bit more research, and I realized how large of a scale that this hoax would have had to have been through all of the Apollo missions to the moon, both simply orbiting the moon as well as landing on the moon. And we are talking about miles and miles, thousands of hours of film footage, thousands more photographs taken from each one of the cameras, the Hasselblad cameras that the astronauts had. And if you go through, and you don't just focus on YouTube, but if you actually go through, and you can find these online, and you go through the actual Apollo film footage from when they went to the moon, and I'm talking about footage that hasn't been shown on YouTube, I'm talking about footage that a lot of these so-called moon hoax debunkers will forget to mention, or they will not show it in their videos, because it shows some beautiful images of the Apollo spacecraft approaching the moon, orbiting the moon, landing on the moon, and you can tell without a shadow of a doubt that the film footage is legitimate. However, what I have also stated is that while it's 100% true that we did go to the moon, there is evidence that some of the footage was faked, due to the fact that when we did get to the moon, there were things there that could not be shown to the public. The astronauts found things there. We've done videos about this. There were craft seen, there were UFOs, there were structures. And due to some of these things that were originally filmed on the moon, they were forced to recreate certain scenes in order to feed those to the public, because obviously they could not show what they actually filmed on the moon. So for years and years, even way before there was even internet forums where conspiracy theorists could even share their theories, there has been a long-standing idea that Stanley Kubrick, the prolific filmmaker, directed and directly ran the operation of hoaxing the moon. And we're talking about people who basically believe that we have never gone to the moon and that it was all faked with the help of the filmmaker Stanley Kubrick. Now, if you don't know who Stanley Kubrick is, this man is one of the most well-known and prolific American film directors, screenwriters, producers, cinematographers, editors, and photographers of all time. He is well known for such films as The Shining, as well as 2001: A Space Odyssey. So basically, the story goes in a nutshell. The government took notice of Stanley's film work when they realized that Stanley was implementing techniques in his films that had never before been seen and were pretty much way ahead of their time. And the government, knowing that they could not get to the moon, for whatever reason, what have you, you can say it was because they could not get through the Van Allen radiation belts, or because we simply didn't have the technology. Whatever the reason, the government could not get to the moon, and they were in a space race with the Soviets, and so they had to hoax it. So they enlisted the services of Mr. Kubrick, after which he began his career in faking every single one of the Apollo mission landings on the moon. And I've looked at all the evidence that has been presented that would show earmarks of Stanley's work in the moon landing footage. And I have to say, some of it is quite compelling because remember, I do say that I believe we have gone to the moon, but some footage was faked. And one of the things that Stanley Kubrick used in his films to create the sense of a wide open area when they were actually filming on a soundstage was something called front screen projection. And it's kind of similar to how green screens are used today. You stand in front of a green screen and a digital background is added in later to make it look like you're standing in the middle of a wide open outside area or on the moon, when really you're inside of a studio standing in front of a green screen. But basically, front screen projection was a similar technique wherein which Stanley would shoot scenes that looked like they were taking place in the middle of the Sahara Desert. However, they were shot on a soundstage using a projection screen in the background that was just a few feet away from the actual set on the soundstage, and then an image of the background was then projected onto that screen. And as you're seeing here from a scene from his film 2001: A Space Odyssey, you can clearly see, if you look closely, the dividing line between the actual set on the stage where it meets this large projection screen. There's always a noticeable dividing line. And here is another image showing this dividing line from where the actual set meets the fake background. And there have been some moon images from the Apollo missions that show similar dividing lines that, to be honest, look very similar to the front screen projection techniques used in Stanley's films. One of those images you're seeing here, showing the astronaut standing there, you see this dark regolith, this dark area of moon dust, and then you can clearly see what looks like a clear dividing line where this dark, messy moon dust goes from dark and disturbed to a completely different texture and color. And you can actually see the dividing line as if it was shot on a soundstage, and the whole area of the background and this whole lunar background area is nothing but a fake on a large projection screen. Now here's another Apollo image showing a similar scene where again we see a noticeable change in the moon dust, in the texture, in the color, where there is a clear, again, what looks like a dividing line where you have two different types of moon dust, almost as if, again, you were filming this on a soundstage and we have the moon set meeting this fake background. And this large, sprawling lunar surface scene is just a projection. So there are little pieces of evidence here and there that do look like possibly NASA did use techniques that were employed by Stanley Kubrick, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Stanley Kubrick was the one who was directing those scenes. Here is another very mysterious image that I haven't actually shown on the channel for a while, but it's one of my favorites, and it's just kind of enigmatic because as you're seeing the rover here sitting on the moon, and you'll notice that there are no tracks, either in front or behind the rover's wheel. So it's almost as if this is a staged photograph, and you can see no tracks. Again, as if the rover was lifted and sat down in the dust by a crane, and whereas in other images you can clearly see the tracks behind and in front of the rover's wheels. And of course, there's also this little piece of evidence you're seeing here from Stanley Kubrick's film called The Shining, where there's a little boy in the film who is wearing a sweater with none other than the Apollo 11 rocket ship. And on the shirt, it actually says Apollo 11. And many people have stated that this is a secret message put in the film by Stanley saying, hey, I helped fake Apollo 11, which was the very first Apollo mission that he supposedly faked, and I am showing you this via this little boy's sweater. Sort of a subliminal message. But again, I will allow you to do your own studying up on the whole Stanley Kubrick moon hoax. I don't think it's very likely, and we actually have some new evidence today further corroborating that Stanley Kubrick did not fake the moon landings. In a stunning new revelation from Mr. Kubrick's daughter, she recently posted to Twitter, and you're seeing a screenshot from her Twitter page. The tweet was labeled RE Faked Moon Landings. Many people have asked me about this, and this feels like the right time to respond. And again, this is Stanley Kubrick's daughter. So his daughter goes on to say in this tweet, "Surely an artist such as my father, whose profound degree of artistic integrity is self-evident, whose political and social consciousness is manifestly present in nearly every film he made, whose highly controversial subject matter literally put his life at risk, and yet he continued to make the films he made. Don't you think he'd be the very last person ever to assist the US government in such a terrible betrayal of the people?" She goes on to say that there are very many real conspiracies that have happened throughout our history and are happening presently. She says, "I am only too aware of the dreadful manipulations perpetrated by governments, secret services, banksters, the military-industrial complex, etc. But claims that the moon landings were faked and filmed by my father? I just can't understand it. How can anyone believe that one of the greatest defenders of mankind would commit such an act of betrayal? My father's artistic works are his unimpeachable defense. Finally," she says, "my love for my father notwithstanding, I actually knew the man. I lived and worked with him, so please forgive my harshness when I state categorically that the so-called truth these malicious cranks persist in forwarding, that my father conspired with the US government to fake the moon landings, is manifestly a grotesque lie." So there you have it, folks, straight from the daughter of Mr. Kubrick, one of the most famous and well-known conspiracy theories of all time, that Mr. Kubrick faked all of the moon landings. And we have his daughter here who has basically summed up the fact that Mr. Kubrick was an artist. And more than that, he was very dedicated to being accurate in his films and doing the research in his films and making sure everything was on the level, and it was simply not in his personality being this way that he would ever help the government betray the entire planet. So again, I will post a link down to her tweet down in the video description. It's an awesome thing. I'm glad she finally came out and cleared that up. We have an actual family member. But again, I will let you be the judge. We will do more videos about the moon landing. And I urge all of you to go out and do your own research and actually watch the Apollo moon mission footage and see for yourself that we did indeed go to the moon, but that there are certain instances where certain pieces have obviously been faked. So we will end on that note, and see you again very soon with another video. Let me know what you guys think. Be sure to share, like, and subscribe on your way out, and we'll be back very soon with much, much more. Stay safe, guys. Thank you.